On the 13th of July 2022, chanting and singing drowned the final words of the judgment that cleared former Nairobi Governor Mike Githongo to run for governor again, this time in the coastal county of Mombasa. A day later, the flashy politician was firmly and squarely back on the ballot after weeks of uncertainty following his disqualification by the IEBC on, among other grounds, the question of integrity.
We thank God for this big victory, because this to us is like victory already.
But a day later, the Supreme Court moved in to lay down what could have far-reaching implications on the application of Chapter 6 of the Constitution going forward. But that is only as far as impeachment goes. On many other issues of integrity, such as corruption and other criminal offenses, the question still begs whether the famous chapter of the Constitution is only good on paper.
No one wants to call the kettle black. No one wants to be the one that actually tells a politician, actually, you're not suitable to serve for public office, and for this we will not clear you.
If you look at the legislation around Chapter 6, the Leadership and Integrity Act, it's a very weak legislation.
On the integrity question, we really set the standards high. Kenya's constitution is perhaps one of only very few in the world, if not the only one, that even gets into the question of leadership and integrity and sets the bar very high, even going as far as setting the bar not just for public office, but even for private conduct. And it does that in dedicating a whole chapter, Chapter 6 to that. But I'm afraid, if you ask me to date, if the integrity bar was at 100% in 2010, right now, it's at most at 40 to 50%, at most.
In the ruling on the 15th of July, the Supreme Court cited Chapter 6 of the Constitution, saying it was not enacted in vain or for cosmetic reasons, adding that the authority assigned to a state officer is a public trust to be exercised in a manner that demonstrates respect for the people, brings honor to the nation and dignity to the office, and promotes public confidence in the integrity of the office. When the now deceased President Mwai Kibaki lifted a copy of the then new constitution at a mammoth public event on the 27th of August 2010, he carried with him the hopes of millions of Kenyans. An air of optimism swept across the country as, for the first time, Kenyans now had a constitution that they could truly call their own following a long struggle, an elaborate public consultation process, and an overwhelming vote at a national referendum.
Will now...
Standing tall in the first half of the Constitution was a chapter that would be famous for its aspirations and infamous for its seeming failure to tame bad manners in public office. The chapter on leadership and integrity, simply known to many as Chapter 6. But Chapter 6, for all its revolutionary provisions, was a product of a long journey to tame corruption in public life, an ambition that got fresh impetus when Kenyans put an end to the 40-year-old rule by the Independence Party KANU in December of 2002.
I am calling upon all of you to come out and fight corruption and agree to support the government in fighting corruption.
The political class simply did not want implementation of Chapter 6.
John Githongo, a journalist and renowned anti-corruption crusader, was appointed the Permanent Secretary for Governance and Ethics by the then newly elected President Mwai Kibaki. The move, a first of its kind in the country, was seen as a powerful signal that something had changed dramatically in the country's approach to fighting corruption. Githongo would hit international headlines after he lifted the lid on the multi-billion shilling Anglo leasing scandal in 2004, implicating the then Vice President Mudi Awori and several powerful ministers in the Kibaki government.
By the time the NARC coalition was elected at the end of 2002, it was elected on an anti-corruption ticket. It's what Kenyans were tired of. We had also had President Moi running the country for 23 years. The economy had stagnated, high levels of corruption. So this captured the imagination of Kenyans. The issue of fighting corruption united Kenyans across the board. And so the party, the opposition won with a big majority. People like me were put into government. And there's a misconception sometimes that I was the fighter against corruption in government. Wasn't the case. Putting me there, more than anything else, sent a message to Kenyans. President is willing to put somebody in State House fighting corruption. I think Kenyans took that, said, hey, that hasn't happened before. So that is when anti-corruption is working, when it's ordinary people who believe.
Githongo, who is now the CEO of Inuka, an organization involved in governance issues, recalls the optimism of Kenyans when the new government came into power and how that hope was quickly dashed by the emerging scandals.
After 8-9 months, that vibe of Kenyans arresting policemen, people willing to have their places demolished, that mood dissipated. Yeah, people can feel when a government is serious or not by the actions it takes, not just what you say, but the actions you take and your comportment, your attitude, and that's what we've lost. Not only lost, but people have become very cynical. And sadly, young people are saying, well, it doesn't matter how you make your money. You can be a corrupt or anything, so long as you make it.
Githongo's courage to call out powerful government officials accused of corruption put him in their crosshairs, forcing him to flee to the United Kingdom.
My situation became untenable. When I'm in government, and my own colleagues, some of them who are in charge of my security, are the ones telling me, you can be, where you're going, you can be killed, So I was asking them, bro, you're the guy who's supposed to be giving me bodyguards to guard me doing this job, and you're the one telling me, So it became very, very contradictory and a very hostile environment.
The police officers snapped.
The 2007 general election presented the country with a new set of challenges. A bungled election pushed the country to the brink of a civil war, with President Mwai Kibaki accused of having rigged his way into a second term and his main challenger, Raila Odinga, refusing to accept the results. What followed was widespread mayhem, with each side of the political divide implicated in the killings and destruction of property.
Hey, sir. Mr. Kenyatta, how are you doing?
Uhuru Kenyatta, a staunch Kibaki supporter in that election, found himself dragged to the International Criminal Court alongside 5 other Kenyans to answer to international crimes charges.
Your Honor, my name is...
Also on that list was William Ruto, the man who would later become Uhuru's deputy on the back of the 2013 general election. Ruto had supported Raila Odinga in the disputed election.
Would you please explain to us...
The ICC cases would become the first major test for Chapter 6 of the 2010 Constitution, which had expanded the question of integrity beyond the narrow definition of corruption.
The prosecutor considered that Mr. B the challenge.
Would the duo facing international crimes be allowed to run for the top jobs in Kenya's first election under that new constitution?
A political question arose. And the political question was whether anyone who is facing charges, including charges relating to corruption, within the country or outside the country, can run for office, especially for the highest office. And you remember at that time, President Kenyatta and the DP were facing, they had been arraigned at The Hague. And a three-judge bench then reversed what Judge Mumbi and the others, and Ngugi and the others had said. And they said, it is not for the court to interfere with such matters, it's for the electorate to decide. And that cleared the way for a lot of people with integrity issues to run, not just at the highest level. To date, the judiciary is still trying to grapple with the effect of that decision.
That's one compelling argument, that we had this foreign agency, the ICC, that had picked some of our leaders and was unfairly, dragging them to this place in The Hague and accusing them of these horrible things that had happened during the 2007-2008 violence. And that mobilized people in a very, very effective way, and introduced a level of impunity. While the Jubilee administration was fighting the ICC, that was the primary project of the top of government. Yeah, the presidency, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that's what they were focused on. And a new environment vis-a-vis corruption appeared that was a free-for-all. First of all, conflict of interest, the Constitution, ultimately is a good thing, but it's a piece of paper, if people don't believe in it. If you don't have constitutionalism, it's just a piece of paper. Conflict of interest was normalized completely.
But Dr. Amolo, who served as a member of the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Review in 2009, the team that helped midwife the 2010 Constitution, says the precedent set by ICC cases was only one part of the problem. Parliament too had its part to play in watering down the substance of Chapter 6.
We are all to blame, and the first level of mutilation was by Parliament. Chapter 6 requires Parliament to enact legislation that will enable functionality of that particular chapter. So in 2012, the National Assembly enacted the Leadership and Integrity Act. That is where the rain started beating us. When they enacted the legislation, legislation is supposed to usually achieve the purposes of the Constitution. It enhances what the Constitution says. It does not reduce the bar. That act reduced the bar. I was then the ombudsman, and I wrote a long opinion to Parliament opposing the legislation as it then was. Right. Parliament being what it is, it passed. That is where the rain started beating us. And since then, it has been a downstream. Every other opportunity that Parliament has, instead of increasing the bar, it lowers the bar.
Otiende, who would later serve as the first chair of the Commission on Administrative Justice, popularly known as the Ombudsman, says the executive then took the cue and normalized bad manners in public governance.
Right from their first appointments to cabinet positions, to PS positions, to appointments for people as chief administrative secretaries, various parastatals, health and all, integrity never played a dominant role. And as long as integrity does not play a dominant role at the point of appointment, the person you have appointed cannot put integrity first. If you could have been barred from office on account of integrity, but you've made it, there's no way you'll bar or remove anyone on that account.
In 2013, as the Ombudsman, the man who is now the MP for Arieda tried to no avail to advise the IBC not to clear 36 leaders to run for office because of integrity questions. Among them was a former Kiambu Governor Ferdinand Waitito and former Nairobi Governor Mike Sonko.
The then chair of IBC and the commissioners took the view that they have no business dealing with any integrity question. If anyone wants to bar anyone, let them go to court. And that cleared the opportunity for so many people with integrity issues to be elected. Having set that precedent, it has become almost impossible for them to reverse it now.
Bobby Mkangi, a constitutional lawyer, was a fellow member of the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Review. He says Chapter 6 was at the heart of why Kenyans desired a new constitution, and elements of it ran in all the drafts that were produced before the 2010 constitution emerged.
And so you find Chapter 6, and as it appeared in the different drafts, being an issue that Kenyans were very dear to. And as I said, when you consider the routing was the views they gave to the commission, that we want leaders who perform in a certain way, we want leaders who are clean, we don't want corruption in government, because Kenyans were also reacting to what they had been going through, since independence. So for us, as COE, when we came and we got the chapters, our work was simply to enhance it. In fact, it was not one of the issues we picked out as issues of contention.
He, however, recalls how resistance to the idea of integrity in public office found its way to a retreat in Naivasha, where key elements of the then draft constitution were discussed and modified.
It was, in fact, more voluminous, more provisions. The current EACC, which has been created through a device we had to put in by forcing Parliament to come up with a body that deals with corruption, was in the Constitution itself. But during the infamous or famous Naivasha meeting, where the Joint Parliamentary Committee on review of the Constitution then, that was led by Mheshimiwa Abdikadir Mohammed, decided to, remove it from the Constitution. That's one of the big pointers as to how the political class then was not pleased with such an institution, and that's why, and when you look at who comprised of the membership of the Joint Parliamentary Committee, it was the political top-heavies from the different parties at that time, meaning that in a sense they were communicating what the politics or what the top politicians or the political reading was at that time. They actually removed the commission. One, apart from diluting the provisions to make them fewer and widely and generally phrased to inbreed, which eventually inbreeds ambiguity. Those are some of the things we are finding now, like when you're trying to deal with if a public or state officer has been impeached, how do you deal with that? How long do we take to deal with cases and such technical and mechanical things?
With a third general election under the 2010 constitution looming, are Kenyans seeing themselves as the last line of defense in the elusive enforcement of Chapter 6?
You remember in 2002, we did not even have a new constitution. But in 2002, Kenyans themselves were so fed up with the lack of integrity in public office, from the lowest level at the village elder and the assistant chief to the police to the highest level, that they took the law into their own hands. And you'll remember scenes when Kenyans would arrest police officers who were taking bribes. You'll remember scenes when Kenyans would refuse to board matatus which were refusing to comply with the Michuki rules. Those Kenyans are no longer alive. But if they are, the integrity standards have lowered. Perhaps because all other institutions have failed them. To the extent that a Kenyan is okay to say that he may be a thief, but he's our thief. We have lowered our own standard to such an extent that we've made peace with mediocrity. We've made peace with lack of integrity. We are no longer in a position to complain of anyone lacking integrity. That's really dangerous.
Caroline Gaita served in the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution, CIC, which was formed to guide the country in realizing key aspirations of the Constitution. She says institutions like EACC should weed out the tainted leaders to give citizens real choices.
Sometimes also we have to ask ourselves about the choices that wananchi are given. So if you look at the clearance, the candidate clearance process, if we don't weed out those that have integrity issues, it means at the end of the day, on the ballot paper, Wanjiku only has bad choices to choose from. Yet, if the duty bearers, whether it's EACC, IEBC, the judiciary, the courts, the DCI, if they all did their part, whether singularly or collectively, then the type of candidate that gets on the ballot paper would be a clean option for Wanjiku. But having said that, though, we've seen in Kenya, whether it's through the party nomination process, or whether elections, even when given a good choice, other considerations come in. So sometimes it's a consideration of ethnicity, other times it's a consideration of money.
Let it be in black and white. We don't clear candidates. We don't. What we do, we report and submit profile of candidates on issues to deal with integrity and pass it to the IBC.
On the 2nd of June, the EACC forwarded a list of 241 aspirants it wanted IEBC to block from running for various political positions based on integrity issues, but the move was caught up in the unending ping-pong between the commissions.
IEBC should take the advice that is given by EACC, and in the event that the affected aspirant has issues, they can always go to court. So the problem that I may see with IEBC is that sometimes they act as if they are holding brief for the aspirants, some of whom are facing very bad cases in court.
Even if you get the best lawyer in this country, he will tell you that the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, it is a little bit amorphous, it's ambiguous, it's too general, it is not watertight, it does not corner somebody to make sure that you are getting somebody clean and somebody who is not clean.
If we implement it with a higher level of fidelity, it can still deliver. So it was not work in vain. Yes, emasculated, but still a strong chapter. And I think that's why they still push and pull and hope around that chapter. And it still remains a primary focus where Wananchi can point to, where the institutions can go back to. And that's why the debate is still around, are we getting Chapter 6 right or not?
The latest move by the Director of Public Prosecutions to slow down on graft prosecutions ahead of the election has raised even more eyebrows, with some activists accusing the DPP of defeating the aims of Chapter 6.
This is within my purview and my discretion, and how I manage the office, and how I also manage cases. Between now and August, graft cases will not be a priority for the ODPP.
Let us wait. We have 4 months for the elections to take place. Literally 4 months, because 9th August, we are talking about 120 days or 118. And crime does not expire.
Political class is spitting on Chapter 6 right now as we go into this election. And we are seeing it by the people who are being allowed to stand. We have criminals, people with court cases. They're laughing at Chapter 6, which reminds us that it's good to have a constitution like that. It's good to have the institutions, but it's important to also understand the culture and see what we can do to change the culture.
But should this be only about the law, or is it time to raise the bar?
When we initially promulgated the Constitution and we got Chapter 6 in it as part of the new Constitution, the bar on leadership and integrity had been set so high. Remember when the former Deputy Chief Justice was left office for pinching a security guard's nose. it wasn't necessarily what I'd call a criminal offense, but it was a breach or a violation of someone's human rights.
On August 26, 2011, a new dawn swept through the judiciary. For the first time, Kenya was putting in place a Supreme Court.
And expectation of justice is the greatest thing, in fact.
Bringing together a distinguished bench of Kenyans who had been selected through a public vetting process which included televised interviews.
I, Nancy Makoha Baraza.
Among the new judges was renowned advocate and human rights activist Nancy Makoha Baraza, a former chairperson of the Kenyan chapter of the Federation of Women Lawyers, FIDA, and a former member of the Yashpal Gai Commission that midwifed the bomber's draft constitution. On this day, Baraza was making history as Kenya's first female Deputy Chief Justice. But barely 4 months later, on New Year's Eve, Baraza would face the wrath of many Kenyans after news broke that she had pinched the nose of a guard at a mall in Nairobi. Her critics cited Chapter 6 on the Constitution that she had sworn to uphold. She had to bow out. In a TV interview almost a decade later, Baraza said her resignation was never about the law, but rather a higher standard: morality.
We have to reevaluate our value system. What is good for us? What is bad for us? What value system do we want? So that we cannot, for example, stick on illegalities and say, oh, because the law says this, let me be here. At least sometimes we should probably consult our morals, our ethics, and sometimes maybe just step aside.
That whole incident did not bring respect or honor to our office, which is what Chapter 6 says, that when you occupy public office, you must act in a manner that brings respect and honor and is not demeaning to your office. But then here we have people who have been caught on camera shooting, almost attempting to kill other individuals, people who have been accused of and charged in court for murder. Actually, I think we have one gubernatorial candidate who's answering to a criminal case where she's been accused of murder, and then one who's seeking Senate who's also answering to murder charges. But they have been cleared. How? And yet we had someone removed from office for pinching a nose.
Nairobi Governor Evans Kidero slapping the county women representative over the county workers' strike.
The issue of integrity under the Constitution is aspirational. It depends on the leader who is then faced with that issue. So, for example, the leader of an institution where an offense has occurred, is he willing to open up the institution for investigation? I guess if you're to compare, I don't know, during Nancy Baraza's, I guess the Chief Justice then was William Mutunga. He was willing to open up and ensure that the process is done. Even though if he wanted, he could have called into the cage and protected his officers.
The economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And
in many countries around the world, leaders have been forced to step aside over integrity questions, even if no criminal charges were pressed against them. Just recently, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was forced to resign for, among other allegations, lying to the public over a public appointment he had made.
My friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable.
But in Kenya, the moral test appears to have failed, leaving many Kenyans to pin their hopes on the criminal justice system. That, observers say, was not supposed to be the spirit of the 6th chapter of the 2010 Constitution.
We have a very narrow interpretation of it, and that's why I say that we have decided to go for the criminal standards but not apply the moral and ethical standards, which that Chapter 6 is all about. And the other thing is, of course, that I think that our institutions have not been bold enough. You know, no one wants to call the kettle black. No one wants to be the one that actually tells a politician, you know, actually, you're not suitable to serve for public office, and for this we will not clear you.
The DPP says the law would help, but currently it is not punitive enough.
We have cases whereby we have prosecuted and convicted, and you see the fellow going back to Parliament because they have probably appealed, and in appeal they've been given a bail, despite the fact that they were found guilty and they were supposed to be incarcerated. And the individual is back in court. I mean, back working as a member of Parliament or as a politician. And there's nothing much we can do because, again, it's very clear that one has to be convicted conclusively, and they must exhaust all appeal processes.
If you look at the legislation around Chapter 6, the Leadership and Integrity Act, it's a very weak legislation. If you look at it insofar as the elective positions are concerned, there's no case law that has defined how we then wish to move.
That some of the things that are happening in this election are things that should happen in a country that does not have a functional legal system.
But even as these institutions lament about what they see as a loophole-ridden legal framework, they also stand accused of being part of the political chess game. Indeed, the Kenya Kwanza Coalition has alleged what it calls the politicization of the integrity battle.
The day we avoid the weaponization and criminalization of politics or political opinion, and using the criminal justice system to try and blackmail and intimidate people on matters to do with politics. That is the day we will succeed with a fight against corruption, when we stop that nonsense.
If somebody challenges the establishment, some of these institutions attack you immediately, you see? And so they may have valid reasons, they may have questions to prod, but there's always a question of why now? And if you look at the myriads of accusations that we have as ODPP, it has come from both protagonists within the political arena, and we've been accused by all of them of being used, of being unfair, and I think it has been very clear that actually tells you that ODPP has exercised its mandate independently. No time has it been influenced by one party or the other.
And we've seen cases where a politician ran for office on a certain political party. They had certain issues. They ran for office and they were successful. And yet some of those issues didn't come up. But once they cross to, the other side of whichever political divide, then those issues come up and come up strongly, and suddenly, there are court appearances and their summons, and yet those didn't happen before. So I think, that's the weaponization from, the duty bearers. But on the other side, you've also seen weaponization by the political class itself.
EACC operates in a manner that is neutral and impartial. And that is evident because even if you look at the people who are named in that list, they come from all the political sides. I will also tell you that some of the individuals who make those allegations are people who have jumped from one political party to another. So it is because of which party then that the commission follows them.
Far from perfect as it is, especially after being watered down, observers believe Chapter 6 still stands a chance of achieving its intended purpose if there is political goodwill.
Yeah, I think the way you can strengthen the institutions is through various legislations. By first of all giving clarity, because as institutions we are able to work but within the law. And it's just the law that needs to be really fine-tuned so that there's clarity. If somebody is charged, irrespective of who they are, as long as they are state officers, or if you want to say public officers, they have to take responsibility, and they must step aside, and they will be barred from doing anything unless the case is complete. In terms of, I think, going back and looking at the drafts, what we lost from the drafts, and also marrying that with the experience that we have right now, where we may have more categorical pronouncements, about certain things.
That we have moved to court as various civil society organizations to seek the court's interpretation of what is a standard that's supposed to be applied when you're assessing someone's suitability or clearing someone for public office. Chapter 6 is quite clear on the moral and ethical standards, but we also want to hear the court's interpretation. We have also asked a question around who is the final custodian of Chapter 6. In our own reading, when you look at Article 79 of the Constitution, which requires an independent commission to ensure a compliance and enforcement of Chapter 6, that is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. But we have seen that IBC has taken over this particular mandate.
But this independence should not mean that we should forget the critical role of the interdependence nature of what we do. We should always be guided by public interest, because at the end of the day, EACC, IEBC, and other agencies are aiming at one thing, and that is to serve public interest.
With another election around the corner, Kenyans are once again facing another date with destiny. Some of the tainted leaders are on the ballot, but there are alternatives as well. At the end of the day, observers argue, the citizens will get exactly the kind of leadership they deserve.
Kenyans get exactly what they want. And for those who elect such people, they should not be hard to complain. Because right now, there's a very dangerous disease that has plagued Kenya during electioneering. And I think it's all over the country, but it's particularly rampant also in our part of the country, where especially youths will not listen to any political message, will not attend any political gathering, will not espouse the ideas of any political formation without some monetary consideration. In my language, loosely translated, they say, unbind us. The youth have chosen to bind themselves with chains that for them to open their minds, you must unbind them. And it's not just the youth. It's Kenyans, even very old Kenyans.
I will say, without any fear of contradiction, that the citizens of this country have largely not discharged their responsibility in the implementation of the Constitution 2010. And that is partly to be blamed for the challenges that we have today.
Things may look bleak, but there is hope for citizens to ensure they elect leaders who have passed the integrity test.
The right messaging, the right actions combined, and this cynical population can be changed, right? So these cynical people who are saying, no, me, I'm going to vote for this Mukora, because they all are Koras anyway. That's despondency.
At the end of it, Mwananchi still has the vote to cast. And really, if individuals have been flagged and they know that these individuals are in court and are facing various accusations, then they should not be given the opportunity to go back to the office. And I think if Kenyans can do that at the ballot, then the moral standard will have gone up.
We complain of everything. We complain about the high cost of living. We complain about the high cost of fuel. We complain about the high debt ratios, and all that is true. But at the bottom line, What causes all this is lack of integrity. You can dissect it any way you want. Corruption is just a small subset of lack of integrity. Lack of integrity goes at very many levels. That's what we need to reclaim. And that's what Kenyans really need to focus on when you are coming into the election, from the highest office to the lowest office.
The final line of defense is the citizens' vetting of the candidates. So all is not lost in terms of realizing what Chapter 6 promises. Citizens have one more bullet. We urge the citizens of this country to undertake moral and ethical evaluation of every person who comes seeking their votes.
Mark Masai, NTV.